Hello everyone, this is a short video to help you uh, fix errors when after the user has entered something unexpected. For example, you're asking the user to enter a decimal number and instead they enter a character and then your program goes nuts and goes into an endless loop. Let me demonstrate how this might look. So I'm going to run this program. This program simply asks the user to type in an integer and then tells them what they entered. So I'm going to enter the number 234, and it says you entered 234, enter 34, you entered 34. Now if I enter the letter Q, it goes into this endless loop. Now I think a lot of you are seeing this happen, and why is it happening? So let me just Control C out of that, and let's take a look at this code. So there's a comment here, and this program shows how to flush the input buffer. So the program is going to prompt the user for an integer. If the user enters an integer, it just tells them what they entered and it repeats. If the user enters an alpha character, meaning a non-numeric, the program goes into an endless loop. Why? This can occur if there are stray characters left in the input buffer. This refers to these stray characters. This can be the end-of-line character from a previous invalid entry. So what's the fix? Well, you call this jflush method after invalid input in order to clear the buffer before the next call to scanf. So this is a big shout out to Justin. He wrote this code. He wrote the code for this flushing, and I suggested we name it the jflush in honor of Justin. So hence the name. So if you look at the code, it's very simple. We have an integer, so we're just prompting the user. Tell the user to enter an integer, and then we call scanf expecting to get an integer. And if we get it, we store it in this variable. Now notice the equal 1 here. We want to make sure we're checking to see if scanf returns a 1. Now this is another way of writing this. In the prior we did things like this: int result gets scanf, and then you check the value of result. You can do it that way, but this is much more concise way of writing the code. So this expression, everything's an expression in programming. So here we have an expression. It happens to be a call to this function, and this function call is going to return a value, and that value is then compared to this value. Simple. So we're expecting to get a 1 back from scanf, which indicates that it successfully read one integer from the command line. And if we get it, we simply echo back you entered, and then we show the value. Now if this is not equal to a 1, something's wrong. We don't know what's wrong, but we know something's wrong. So we come down here and we display this message. You entered an invalid number, or it's not an integer, and then we would call jflush. Now, as you can see, I'm not calling it here, and that's why it's going into that crazy loop. Next time I run it, I'll call this jflush. What does jflush do? Well, it defines, there's a local variable here called C, which is just, it's a character. It's initialized to the blank character. Note that when you're defining character literals, you use single quotes, not double quotes. Double quotes are for strings or a sequence of characters. And then it just goes into this while loop. So while C is not equal to the new line character, so we simply scan that character out of the buffer and we just throw it away. So we're trying to flush out the debris, for lack of a better word, that's in the buffer. When the user entered that character Q, as you saw a moment ago, scanf tried to read an integer out of the buffer, and it didn't find one, so it left the Q and the new line character in the buffer. And then the next time you try to scanf, it finds the Q and the end of line character in the buffer. So it fails, and then it immediately tries to read it again, and it continues to fail because it's not finding what it needs, so it just keeps looping. So if after an unsuccessful scanf, you should call the JFlush to clean out the buffer and then come back, loop back, and call scanf again. So now I'm going to share the code with you, but let's run it again and call JFlush. So here I'm going to save this, and now I run it again. Let's make this bigger. And now I enter my 234 again, and enter the 34 again, and now I enter the Q, and it says that's not an integer, and it prompts for the number again. Now this program doesn't end. I'm not prompting for, it's just an example. So if you want to end this, you just press Control-C. So I hope this helps relieve some of your anguish and frustration over the use of scanf, and so it pays. In the C library, there's documentation, and it will tell you if a function such as scanf, it will tell you if it returns a value, and if it does, it's wise to check that return value to see if you got what you expected. Scanf is not the only function that returns a value to indicate success or not success. So try adding this JFlush to your programs. Whenever you get an invalid input from the user, try calling JFlush, and that should help you. Okay, thanks very much, and see you in class.